News flash. Transnational corporations led by the financial industry have taken over the planet. Now before you go grabbing a weapon hollering, "Ma, where's my ammo?" First of all, this was old news way before Catherine opened Chapter 7 of Patriot Acts with it. In fact, she says it began around 1980. Second of all, this is not a problem that can be solved the old-fashioned way. That's because corporate persons are not God's creations that can bleed and die. They're creations of law, which is why there's only one way to cut them down to size.
Law way.
Which way?
Law way.
Law way. I see. Okay. Go ahead.
Because, as Tom Hartman, Catherine Crier, and I have pointed out before, because every Supreme Court justice, but maybe a couple, in our nation's history since 1886 have been happy to pretend that the monstrous fraud in the Santa Clara case granted corporate persons the same rights under our Constitution as American citizens. The only way that the legitimate ruling power in our nation, we the people, can be restored to power is through a constitutional amendment. Something to keep in mind, even if we the people were able to push through and ratify a constitutional amendment abolishing corporate personhood, you can bet your ass that would not be the end of it. The Supreme Court could not declare that constitutional amendment unconstitutional. That would be a stretch even for today's Supreme Court justices. But you can bet your ass that a few of them would do everything that they possibly could to undermine that amendment. If you think that sounds crazy, then maybe you're an iGen kid who wasn't even alive in 2000, or a millennial too young to remember the 2000 election, when in a case called Bush v. Gore, 5 out of 9 justices of the Supreme Court essentially said, F democracy, F rule of law, F the Constitution, we want the corporatist puppet who lost the election in the White House. And so they screwed the legitimate winner of the 2000 presidential election out of the presidency. Don't get me wrong, I am not a big fan of Al Gore. I think he's a good man. Unfortunately, he's also a nice man. Remember, the Lord requires you to be a good person. He does not require you to be a nice person when confronted with corruption. Was Jesus nice when he went into the temple and overturned the money changers' tables? As I see it, Al Gore is a good person. However, it was his lack of toughness, leadership skills, and gumption that enabled him to be punked by corporatists out of the 2000 election. The tragedy is that he almost certainly would have kept us out of the disastrous war in Iraq. Getting back to somebody with an abundance of toughness and gumption, Catherine goes on talking about global corporatists, saying, their interests conflict directly with those of democracy, genuine free enterprise, and often the well-being of our nation and its citizens. Catherine says we have our work cut out for us, but we have the power to change the road we're on. The first thing we have to do is quit drooling like hungry dogs whenever we hear slogans like limited government, low taxes, and free trade. Actually, thanks to Donald Trump, credit where credit is due, probably the only Americans who still believe free trade is a good thing are pin-headed economics professors and mindless believers in Democratic Party slogans. But most conservatives are still unaware of what the phrase limited government really means. It means little to no regulations over corporations to do whatever the hell they want, including corrupting our government. And low taxes? Seriously? In a corporatist system like we have now, low taxes does not include low taxes for you, not unless you're rich. Catherine goes on to explain how global corporations started taking over the world in the early 1980s when a political ideology was resurrected by Ronald Reagan. as well as by a depraved female politician over in Great Britain by the name of Margaret Thatcher. Catherine points out that their political ideology, essentially good old-fashioned Edmund Burke-style rich elitist a-hole conservatism, actually revolved around an economic ideology called laissez-faire economics. The term laissez-faire means let do in French. To corporatists, this means let giant corporations do whatever the hell they want. That was not what Adam Smith intended when he used that term in Wealth of Nations, referring to small locally owned businesses. But corporatists are not sticklers for the truth whenever it comes to them using a fancy sounding term as a sick joke slogan for them doing whatever they want. Hardcore believers in laissez-faire economics believe, at least say they believe, that there should be absolutely no government interference, no regulations or subsidies whatsoever on corporations, because they believe in what they call the magic of the marketplace. Catherine points out that today this notion is often referred to as market fundamentalism. Other nerds call it free market fundamentalism and call the true believers free market fundamentalists because of their cult-like belief in corporatist ideology and their rejection of what Adam Smith actually said about free markets and the necessity of governments regulating corporations. It might be interesting to mention that free market fundamentalists tend to forget all about what they believe in the minute they trip over their own greed, stupidity, and arrogance, fall flat on their faces, and need a government bailout. Of course, the minute they get that bailout, they go back to being believers again. Catherine doesn't use the word cult, but she does point out that free market fundamentalists take the very complex world of global economics and reduce it to a few noble sound bites, like free markets and fair trade. She also points out that they portray things as either good, like private enterprise, or bad, like big government. That pretty much describes the simple-minded, black and white thinking of cult members. Next, Catherine quotes a pretty awesome economics nerd by the name of Joseph Stiglitz, who, talking about the 2008 economic crash, said, "The fall of Wall Street is to market fundamentalism what the fall of the Berlin Wall was to communism." Unfortunately, when Catherine wrote this just a few years after the crash, neither she nor old Joe could imagine just how quickly Wall Street would rebound and return to free market fundamentalism with about $1 trillion in government and Federal Reserve bailouts. Next, Catherine lays into the Tea Party movement, which was a big deal when she wrote this. She says she was thrilled when it began, but says of the members, soon they lost the plot. They refused to look past the ideology and see the facts. Talking about the ideology being fed to them by the Tea Party movement's corporatist organizers. Worse yet, she says, they lumped a social agenda, guns, gays, and God, into the conversation. Catherine also mentions the corporatist sick joke catchphrase, traditional values. If you're an American conservative and you believe you know what that term traditional values means, then that is exactly why you are so easily manipulated by corporatist horse crap whenever they go throwing that term around. As an equal opportunity abuser, such a badass, Catherine next lays into Americans who believe in Democratic Party ideology. She points out how back in the 90s, Bill Clinton welcomed Wall Street into his administration and congressional Democrats reaped the rewards in their campaign coffers. She immediately adds, they tasted serious corporate power and they liked it. The bottom line point that Catherine makes is that during the Clinton administration, Democratic Party elites were actively serving the corporatist agenda. Next, she talks about economic boom-bust cycles, which always follow deregulation of the financial industry. To which Adam Smith would have said,
Surprise, surprise, surprise!
Next, Catherine goes back to the 80s and talks about how free market fundamentalist Ronald Reagan believed that deregulating banksters would somehow solve the economic problems that he inherited when he became president, when he was elected in 1980. When Reagan signed legislation gutting regulations on savings and loans in 1982, he said it was the most important legislation for financial institutions in 50 years. All in all, I think we've hit the jackpot. Catherine immediately says, some jackpot. In less than 7 years, the industry was gutted. She then goes on to give a bailout amount of over $180 billion. I don't know where she got that figure. Sounds like a lowball number you'd find on Wikipedia. Kevin Phillips documents what are called off-balance sheet funds and manipulation by the Fed to just add whatever more was needed for the bailout directly to the national debt. All in all, the corporatist jackpot very likely cost we the people about $1 trillion in today's money, including interest. Catherine then asks, what lesson did our politicians learn from this crisis? Can you guess? If you said, not a dang thing, sorry, but you're not thinking like a corporatist politician, which is probably a good thing. They think like this: if deregulation wrecks our economy, but it makes the rich corporatist a-hole donors richer, more deregulation. By 1987, Wall Street investment banks wanted regulations eased up on them. They didn't like that there was legislation imposed on them back during the Great Depression that required them to keep their actual banking business completely separate from what was essentially their gambling casino investment business. They argued that the federal agency responsible for overseeing investment banking, the Securities and Exchange Commission, would ensure that the investment banksters behaved in a responsible and honest way. Catherine points out what a sick joke that was. The Reagan administration had gutted funding and staffing for the SEC, severely crippling its ability to even do its job. Long story short, investment banksters got the rules relaxed on them in '87, followed by more deregulation, leading up to the mother of all deregulation acts in 1999. Economics nerds like to say that this act turned Wall Street investment banks into weapons of mass economic destruction. Catherine devotes the rest of this chapter to putting in a nutshell how deregulation of the financial industry caused a nationwide race to the bottom of banking standards in order to maximize profits for banksters and their rich investors, leading to the crash of 2008. In an even smaller nutshell, by the late 1990s, investment bankers had created extremely complicated financial products called derivatives so that they could rake in massive amounts of money while doing no productive work and contributing nothing to our real economy or our society. In 1998, an awesome true nerd at an obscure federal regulatory agency figured out, true nerd style, that unregulated derivatives had a huge potential for fraud and economic disaster. She warned the Clinton administration in no uncertain terms of the danger. Well, a whole bunch of high-ranking Clinton administration officials were apoplectic. They threw a bureaucratic beatdown on her that caused her to resign the following year. That year, 1999, after Clinton's Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin successfully pushed through the Financial Services Modernization Act, he resigned and went to work for Wall Street mega bank Citigroup, where he collected $126 million over the next 8 years leading up to the crash. Just for craps and giggles, I did some math. If you're a middle-class American doing productive work, contributing to our economy and our society, earning $50,000 a year, it would take you over 2,500 years to earn the $126 million that Rubin collected while crashing our economy. Corporatists would insist that's capitalism. Catherine finishes up kind of pointing out the obvious, saying that Wall Streeters couldn't care less about growth in our real economy or the well-being of American citizens. She ends off the chapter saying that the cure for these problems is for Americans to understand the economic system that has replaced true American capitalism and the steps needed to restore it. Well, the first thing that you need to accomplish anything is a plan, a roadmap that'll take you where you want to go. Chapter 8 is entitled Mapping Our Economic Future. I'll be covering that next time. See you then. If you like this video, why not click the like button? I'll put a link to the next episode over here.